This video for the tip of the week was prompted by some questions I've had from my students in the basics class. And sometimes, you forget what is a problem for people or what is interesting. And I have a line of stitches here. These are left slanting decreases. And since many of my students in the basics class are preparing for the master knitting program, one of the things that you do in that first level is you learn how to do proper left slanting decreases. And this one right here is a pretty good one. Notice that it is a little less noticeable than these guys up here. And it is, if I stretch it, it is open at the bottom. That top stitch, which slants to the left, is open. And the stitch underneath it is open. You get that stitch, and I'll talk about this in a minute, by doing an SSK decrease properly. And that is slipping the two stitches knitwise and then knitting them through the back. Now, this decrease, I had a student who asked why you could not do a knit two together through the back loop. Now, a knit two together through the back loop is basically the same thing as an SSK, gives you a left slanting decrease, except that you do not shift the position of the stitches. Now, the reason why you slip the position of the stitches is so that they don't do this. Notice that this top stitch, yes, it is slanting towards the left, but if I pull it this way, notice that it is twisted at the base. And the same is true of the stitch below. It is twisted at the base. And twisted stitches can be a problem. For one thing, they're more noticeable. And if I am working, say, a V-neck sweater where I have knit two together decreases on one side, and I have SSK decreases or left slanting decreases that are not worked properly, they are not mirrored. Twisted decreases look different, and they also have a different gauge, which is more important than untwisted stitches. Notice that this decrease is just a little bit smaller than the one below that's worked properly, because twisted decreases are compressed. Generally, you don't want twisted decreases in garments where you're shaping. Where you see twisted decreases is in lace for emphasis, because it is more noticeable. Now, this one is formed by working the two stitches through the back without shifting them. This one, where it is twisted, is open on the bottom. Notice that this one is open on the bottom, but it is twisted on the top. How I got this one was I did an SKP, where you slip the stitch, you knit the stitch, and then you pass this stitch over. The problem with it, and the reason why this is twisted, is instead of slipping it knitwise, I slipped it purlwise, which is what twists the stitch. And then I've got this guy up here. This is a decrease that I've had several students ask me about, and you'll see this in a lot of reference books. But there is a problem with it. In this one, when you make an SSK, you just slip the first stitch. You leave the second stitch alone, and then you work it as you would an SSK. But what it does is, if you notice that I've got my nice little column of stitches up here, and then I've got this guy, and what it does is it leaves that second stitch twisted. And it is a bit more noticeable. Compare it to the SSK that's worked properly, where I have the open forms of the stitches going up, and they all stretch nicely. And then I have this one where the top, yeah, it's not twisted, but the bottom one is. Now, this is a small point, and in your own projects, feel free to use whatever you want, but it's good to know the right way to do it, and to know why you're doing it, and the possible drawbacks of doing it this way. Now, I've got some needles here, and let's just do a few of these. And in the blog entry that accompanies this video, you will see the other swatch, and I'll have them labeled. So, I'm going to just knit a stitch or two, and here is how you make an SSK properly. I'm going to slip the stitch. And what you want to do, the reason why you have all of these permutations is that it's very easy to stretch out an SSK. But if you use just your needle tips and just barely touch them, and then just barely slip them. And what I do is when I'm slipping them, I just leave my needle there because that's stretching them out even less, and I go ahead and make my decrease. And it's fairly small and unobtrusive. Now, if I want to knit the two through the back loop, I'm going to omit the slip, and I'm just going to knit them through the back. And if you again, notice that that's twisted on the bottom. Now, the other version that we have is a slip, and then I knit that stitch. This is actually an SSK, but ooh, I did it the right way. It's hard to do things the wrong way when you know the right way. I'm going to slip it, instead of slipping it knitwise, I'm going to slip it purlwise, and I'm going to knit that stitch, and I'm going to pass this stitch over. And by the way, this is the decrease, George. This is the decrease that is used in England and Japanese pattern, English and Japanese patterns. And notice that it switches, twists that decrease. Now, that is the wrong way to make an SSK. Basically, when you're decreasing, you always want to slip the stitches knitwise, because if you don't, and you slip them purlwise, it's going to twist the decrease. And ignore my cat, who is going to shake my tripod. Now, the last one is the one where just that second stitch is decreased. Oh, jeez, get over here. Ugh. He's got the yarn all caught up on his tail. Yeah, George, no, don't eat the yarn. Don't eat the yarn. And of course, he's eating the yarn. All right, now for the SSK worked, where you slip just the top stitch, but you don't slip the bottom stitch. I return this to the needle and I knit them through the back, and you can see that what that does is it twists the bottom stitch, but the top stitch is open. For a full description, go to my blog, because I will go on ad nauseum about all of these things.